Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Episode 172, The Last Stand of the Tigress. Caterina Sforza, Part 4.
E non posso più accucciarmi e così ritorno su. Lascio I colli nelle valli tra due salici piangenti. Io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
We have mentioned what we're about to mention quite a few times and will again, but as the Romans said, repetita iuvant, repeating helps. Towards the end of the 1400s, Caterina Sforza Medici was minding her own business, keeping her little estate made up of the cities and lands of Forli and Imola, and minding her hobbies, particularly medicinal herbs and cosmetics. On the international level, dark, ominous clouds were gathering over Caterina's sky. The Duke of Orleans, Louis, had become King Louis XII after Charles VIII had died without children, talking about France, obviously. He inherited the claim to the Kingdom of Naples, as well as bringing his own ancestral claim to the Duchy of Milan. The fact that the French also wanted revenge for Duke Ludovico Sforza switching sides during Charles's campaign was an extra issue on the table. This meant that Caterina could potentially lose the support of her uncle Ludovico. What's more, in February 1499, France reached an agreement with Venice, the Treaty of Blois, Venice being one of the more recent enemies of Caterina. Then the definitive blow came. Alexander VI, official ruler of the Papal States, which theoretically included Caterina's lands, assigned the temporary rule to his son, Cesare Borgia. The excuse was that many local lords, including her, were not paying their tributes. Caterina sent ambassadors to Rome to clear up the situation and also to point out that she, in turn, was owed money that had been promised to her first husband, Girolamo Riario. But the argument fell on deaf ears. The Borgia's plan was now in motion. As the threat of Louis XII loomed ever more present over her uncle, Caterina tried to renegotiate an alliance with Florence. The Florentines sent a certain Niccolò Machiavelli to negotiate. To try and reach a more advantageous agreement was that the Florentines didn't really need the alliance, but for past friendships would consider it. Caterina replied to the silver-tongued diplomat that she had always been very much satisfied with their words, but not so much with their actions. Talks did not amount to much, and it was hardly worth mentioning, aside perhaps from the presence of Machiavelli, were it not for an opportunity to talk about an anecdote that showed how famous Caterina was at the time. You see, Machiavelli had another secret mission from a friend, Biagio Buonaccorsi. The diplomat, while in Forlì, was to pick up a painting of Caterina to take back to his friend so he could hang her up in his house. An early example of a fanboy putting up a poster of his favorite celebrity. A bit like the Janet Jackson and Alyssa Milano posters I had as a kid. As if things couldn't get any worse, in the fateful year of 1499, yet another bout of plague hit, which Caterina was able to counter by operating a total lockdown or shutdown of her cities. No one was allowed in, and no one was allowed out. Then came the news that she had been dreading. Ludovico il Moro's general Galeazzo Sanseverino, Count of Caiazzo, had lost a decisive battle to the general of the French and Allied troops, Gian Giacomo Trivulzio. Il Moro had fled Milan, and on the 6th of October 1499, Louis XII entered the city in triumph. Among the many others, he would have been accompanied by Cesare Borgia. This is probably when Borgia would have met a man he would later hire as an architect and military engineer between 1502 and 1503, a certain Leonardo da Vinci. At the beginning of that same year, he would have finished a little doodle on a wall with a bunch of dudes at a dinner party. My dear listener, forgive me for what I'm about to say, but Jesus sends one of his disciples to book a place for a dinner. He knew it would have to be a very important one. So the disciple goes to a local innkeeper and says, "We'd like to book a table, please." The innkeeper says, "For how many people?" And the disciple says, "Well, for 26. And the innkeeper says, "Okay, so that's a table for 26 and food for 26. And the disciple answers, No, table for 26, but food for 13. And so the innkeeper says, "Well, why is that?" And the disciple answers, "Well, we only intend to sit round one side of the table." Apologies. Caterina now embarked on a desperate diplomatic campaign, but for everyone the writing was now on the wall. She was fighting for a lost cause. The French advanced and took city after city in the west, while Venice advanced in the east. Around this time, Caterina was accused of attempting to assassinate Pope Alexander with poisoned letters. This accusation would pop up again, but it would eventually be dropped. While it was very likely an attempt by the Pope and Cesare to find a further excuse to move against Caterina, from what we know of her, we can't exactly completely rule it out. Only Florence remained by her side, but soon enough they too had to bow to growing pressure, and she was left completely alone. In November 1499, Cesare Borgia showed up with his army on the border between Ferrara and Imola. On the 21st, the city opened its gates to him without a fight. This did not save it from violence and pillaging. The fortress of Imola, under the command of Dionigi Naldi, held out and asked for 3 days so that they could send for a response from their lady. The 3 days passed with no word, and the commander and troops surrendered and were allowed to leave. Caterina intended to concentrate all her resources and energy on Forlì. She now sent all her jewels, important documents, and children to Villa Medici in Florence. Her eldest, Ottaviano, actually rose to the moment for once and initially refused to go and actually helped out his mum with the preparation of the defenses. Finally, on the 12th of December, Caterina sent him away too. Just as she was sending all that was dear to her away for protection, came an important moment in the film just before the last stand, the one where all her old companions and friends came to Forlì to be with her as she resisted the inevitable. This also included the occasional adventurer who liked the idea of a good old romantic hopeless cause. Speaking of Forlì, after the easy fall of Imola, Caterina was worried about the citizens of her remaining city. She called upon the council, who renewed their loyalty to her, but at the same time pointed out the examples of Alfonso of Naples and her uncle Ludovico il Moro, who had fled, saving their citizens from the experience of a siege. They also pointed out that Pope Alexander, Cesare Borgia's main supporter and cash cow, could not live forever, so it could just be a question of waiting it out. Caterina decided that Forlì could not be trusted. She concentrated everything on the fortress of Ravaldino, filled in the moat and destroyed the bridges. Everything was ready for the last stand of the tigress of Forlì. Meanwhile, the council of Forlì reached an agreement with Borgia, and on the 17th of December he entered the city. When Caterina heard the news, she fired a single mortar against the civic tower of the city from the fortress. Cesare's army of about 14,000, including a good number of prostitutes, took up lodgings in the city. Caterina then had her artillery fire on the houses of the members of the council who had betrayed her. You may remember that it was a tradition in Forlì for any new aspiring lord of the city to make 3 rounds of the main square and be acclaimed by the people or face silence and failure. On the day that Borgia entered the city, it was pouring down, and he only made half a single round of the square. Not a good omen to start with. The inhabitants soon came to regret their choice, having to undergo pillaging, rape, and theft of clothes in a freezing cold winter. Now it was time to concentrate on the fortress of Ravaldino. It was considered to be impregnable, but Borgia had at his command one of the most modern and powerful artilleries in existence. He first attempted to negotiate with Caterina, to no avail. He then put a price on her head, to which she responded by putting a price on his head. She even barely missed killing him on one occasion and capturing him on several others with sorties out from the fortress, often led by Caterina herself, clad in full armor and on horseback. She missed Borgia, but she did manage to kill the French artillery commander with a good shot. Mortars and cannon shot continued to rain down on the besiegers, skillfully managed by a man who came to be known as Il Bombarolo di Madonna, My Lady's Gunner. With defiant spirit, those inside the fortress would write insults on the projectiles rained down and continue to hold banquets and balls inside. Now, external factors started to turn in Caterina's favor. News came from Milan of the Milanese general fighting for the French, Gian Giacomo Trivulzio, becoming very unpopular, and Ludovico il Moro planning his return thanks to the support of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian. Financial help came from Florence. At a certain point, a group of 40 pilgrims passing through asked to be let into the castle to seek shelter and food. Borgia, liking the idea of sending in more mouths to feed, let them pass. Once inside, the group threw off their pilgrims' robes and revealed themselves for the soldiers they were, and joined the defense. Unrest started to spread in Forlì under the control of Cesare Borgia. The situation was getting out of hand. He now concentrated all of his firepower on a single point with a barrage that went on day and night for days on end. On the 10th of January, 1500, just shy of a month of siege, a breach was made. On the 12th of January, the final assault was ordered. Aside from the breach, the falling rubble had created a sort of bridge over the moat that the attackers could use. The characteristic of the fortress of Ravaldino was that it was divided into different separate sections. That meant that communication and defense was made a little more complicated, but it also meant that once one section was taken, the attackers would still have to fight their way into the next. It is at this point that one of the mysteries of the siege of Ravaldino occurred. As the attackers prepared to move on the next section, a large tower full of gunpowder exploded, creating a further breach and allowing Borgia's army into the next section. Suspicion would later fall on the commander of the defences, one Giovanni da Casale, who was also supposedly Caterina's latest lover. As the situation grew increasingly hopeless, the defenders started to panic and surrender or try to flee. One after the other, they all gave up, except for one. Caterina Sforza continued to fight, sword in hand, cursing and pleading, ready to die rather than surrender. Cesare Borgia took advantage of a lull in the fighting to ask Caterina to negotiate. As she was about to answer, she was taken from behind by one of Borgia's men. The tigress had been captured. Her remaining soldiers were then killed one after the other. Coins were found in the stomach of one of them, and so the rest of them were then gutted. Caterina became a prisoner of Cesare Borgia. There is some indication that the two passionate, sensual individuals had some sort of relationship, something highly believable for both of them. She was first held at Palazzo Belvedere in Rome, but after attempting to escape, she was transferred to the more secure Castel Sant'Angelo, where her fight had started decades before. She would eventually be released, and after a legal battle against her brother-in-law, another Lorenzo de' Medici, she obtained custody of her son, Ludovico de' Medici, son of Giovanni. With the death of Alexander VI in 1503 and the fall of Cesare Borgia, the lords of Romagna tried to get back their holdings. Forlì went back to Antonio Maria Ordelaffi. Caterina was no longer wanted by the people there. She did not let this get her down. She continued to cultivate her hobbies and manage her household, which became easier after her son obtained his Medici inheritance. All her children were utterly devoted to their mother, except for the two eldest, Ottaviano and Cesare, who only showed up when they needed money. Otherwise, she lived without remorse or regret, answering her fan mail from admirers and old veterans, as well as correspondence about her experiments. On the 28th of May, 1509, the bells of San Lorenzo in Florence sounded in mourning. Caterina Sforza had died at the age of 46. As far as her legacy goes, she didn't really need anyone else to make it even greater. She was famous in her own time, and still is centuries later. But we do have a little teeny tiny thing to mention. The son she had by Giovanni de' Medici, Ludovico, had been renamed by his mother upon the death of his father, with his own name, Giovanni. He became, perhaps, the favorite of his mother, the wild spirit of the Sforza mixed with the genes of the Medici. Quite a combination. His mother had wanted him to have a career as a condottiero, a military leader, and that is what he became. Not only that, but he became one of the most successful, feared, and famous condottieri of his time, known as Giovanni dalle Bande Nere. And that's not the end. Giovanni in turn had a son whom he called Cosimo. In 1537, this young chappie would get a Roman numeral stuck next to his name as the first Duke of Florence, and in 1569, the first Grand Duke of Tuscany. Not bad at all for his grandma, the tigress of Forlì. Thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned for the sketch after the credits. A History of Italy is a Sentire Media production, created and hosted by me, Mike Corradi, and produced by my wonderful Patreon supporters, whom I would very much like to thank, starting from the third half of the Margherita Hack and Galileo Galilei level, and they are Neville, Niels, Paradise, Patrizia K, Peter F, Rachel, Rocco, Roberta D, Rod L, Rodney N, Rudy, Russell, Sandra, Scott, Sean, Shelby, Shelley, Steve, Stephen, and Tap Dance Down Under. And of course, we cannot forget the tippy top Maria Montessori and Dante Alighieri level. Lisa K, Andrew M, Peter W, David L, David C, J.W. Sen, David A, Karen D, Peter F, Helenka, Kaiser Boss, Brigid, Dallas, and Joseph. Thank you, one and all. If like them you'd like to have access to early ad-free episodes and extra content when we can get it out, you can go and become a Patreon supporter at our website, ahistoryofitaly.com, which is currently under renovation but still has a support page you can click through to and become a Patreon supporter. You can also get in touch, hello@ahistoryofitaly.com, or via social media, Twitter, and I like to call it Twitter and not X, Facebook, and Instagram. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, arrivederci. My lady, the enemy has breached the walls.
Okay, well, I show them. I let them see that I have here what is needed to...
Sorry to interrupt, my lady, but that was another siege.
So, can I say the same thing?
It's just that no one is actually threatening your children this time.
Oh, aren't they?
No, my lady. The only person who has threatened your children recently is you.
Oh, yeah. You should have seen Ottaviano and Cesare's silly faces.
Yes. I don't think they were quite expecting to hear that kind of language from their mother.
Yeah, that was fun.
Anyway, my lady, the besiegers wish to discuss the terms of your surrender and imprisonment.
Imprisonment? What did I do?
Well, you almost killed Borgia with a cannon shot.
Yeah, almost.
Then you actually killed their artillery captain.
Oh, yeah, that was a great shot.
Not to mention the insults you had written on the shells.
Yeah, well, that was funny.
They say you also tried to poison the Pope, Borgia's father.
They can prove that.
Well, you said to me the other day, please send this poison letter to that the Pope.
Yeah, but they don't know that.
Then you've only just finished sticking your sword through a bunch of their soldiers.
I was just waving it around. It's not my fault they walk into it.
Well, they don't see it that way.
Wimps, I won't go down without a fight.
It seems Cesare Borgia himself will come to take custody of you.
He will?
Yes, my lady.
The hot one with the goatee?
Yes, I suppose you could say that.
Oh, well, I suppose you have to stop fighting sometime, huh?
But you just said you wanted to go down fighting.
Never mind what I just said. I'm surrendering now.
Very well, my lady.
I just go and get changed, and then you can let him in.
Do you want me to stay, my lady?
No, off you go. And if you hear any lamentation,
Yes?
just ignore it. I've been a naughty girl.
As you wish, my lady.